What's up, everyone? Welcome to another live stream. Great to be here. Hopefully, I can be of some assistance to those of you joining or watching this later on. I've got quite a few submissions, got one ready to go if we are ready to get straight into it, but I'll see if there are any questions in the chat. Any way I can help you guys with questions you might have just a couple of weeks out now from the HSE, VCE exams coming up shortly as well. So let me know if you have any questions about how to study at this point, specific texts that you are concerned about, how to adapt to different types of questions, anything like that. Let me know, and I am here to answer. I love that we've got JeddAI with a G joining us. Good evening to you, sir, or ma'am, whichever one it may be, but JeddAI with a G is more than welcomed. Let's see if we've got anyone else. I am joining a bit late, so I do apologize for that. I was actually just speaking with an HSC student and going through some strategy on adapting to different types of questions, how to think about, identifying the keywords of a question and really understanding that. I think sometimes people see a particular word, a key term in a question or a term that they think is the key term, and then they get distracted by that and basically frame everything they're saying around something that's actually not the key focus of the question. So they see a word that looks important, but when you actually read the whole question, it's not the most important thing. So it's very important to correctly identify the key term of the question or the crux of the question. There might be multiple key terms, but what is the crux of the actual question? Because if you get that wrong, you're suddenly emphasizing the wrong thing throughout the entirety of your essay. So super important to read the question a few times to understand what the crux of it is, and then, yes, go through and identify the 2 to 3 key terms, but understand which term is the crux of the question. Okay, so there might be 2 or 3 keywords that you need to address, but one of those terms, one of the phrases in the question is most likely going to be where all the emphasis should be put, and then you have to address the other terms as well. But the less terms that you have to focus on, the better, because it means you can be more focused, add more depth on that one particular term. And then if you try to do more and more terms or longer phrases, you end up just repeating the question or getting sidetracked, right? So you've got to identify the right key term in a question. And I'll show you guys an example actually now, just to give an example of what I'm talking about. So let's see if I can pull this up. I think it was this one, 2023. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna share this with you. So let's have a look at this. This is just an example of what to be careful with. Hey, JeddAI with a G, if you are, it depends how long it is. I'm happy to do it because you might be one of the only people here, and I appreciate you waiting. I know I kept you waiting earlier. If it's something short, like if it's a thesis or something that you've done to respond to a question, maybe it's a topic sentence. If it's a short paragraph, I mean, probably won't be able to do it in complete detail, but why don't you send me like the most important part that you want feedback on, topic sentence with a question. Have you already submitted it on the link? Otherwise, are you going to put it into, it might be a bit hard to put into the chat because I think you get cut off. You'll have quite a few things. So if you want to send it through now on the live stream link, I'll pull it up for you and we can have a look. Fair enough. But yeah, just put it through. Don't make it too long. We'll just focus on a couple of the main sentences and I can help you with that. So send it through on the link. Do you know the link I'm talking about? It's just below the description in the YouTube videos where the live streams are posted. What would be the most crucial part? Well, it would be topic sentence followed by a couple of sentences of analysis. So I'd like to see how you're introducing your ideas in the topic sentence part at the top, and then a couple of subsequent sentences that have your analysis, how you're dealing with the quotes, techniques, and a question at the top would help. So yeah, intro is good as well. Send it through and I'll pull it up in a moment. So just sharing now the question that I was referring to before. So here's an example of an essay question. This is module A. This is module A, textual conversations. Question 1 here. When we engage with a text, the question we must ask ourselves is, what is this text really about? Consider the pair of prescribed texts that you have studied. To what extent does your engagement with the later text make you ask this question about the earlier text? Okay, so if you look at the phrase here, like they've kind of given you a statement. This is what I call a statement question, which is then followed by this, to what extent do you agree with this, or to what extent is this true of the text that you have studied? It's a classic question. It's one of 3 main types of questions. There's this statement question where they come out and say something, and then you have to kind of insinuate or imply that you agree with it, or you kind of agree with it, or you completely disagree with it, or you kind of disagree with it. You make that clear by saying significantly, or however, substantially. You can use language that implies your level of agreement throughout, and obviously make your argument. But there's also that's one type of question. There's also just the direct kind of module-based question with keywords from the rubric. So, and that could also include a theme or something like that. Let's just call it a theme-based question or a rubric-based question, where you get a question that comes out and says, how do textual conversations kind of demonstrate the power of reimagination? And like the word reimagination, it isn't a theme, but it's pulled directly from the module. So it's like a unit-specific question. It's from the module-specific question. A lot of questions will have the module terms in there, so they're all module specific, yes, but the question itself is structured in a way where it just has some key terms from the module, or it has a key theme in there. How does the textual conversation explore the theme of imprisonment or something? It won't say the theme of, but it'll give you a theme, and that's one type of question as well. The other type of question is where you get an extract or an excerpt. So they'll actually give you an extract from the text, or texts, both texts, and then ask you a question in relation to those extracts. And those extracts basically act as examples of the key ideas that you're meant to explore. So it's almost like the question giving you key ideas in the form of examples, and it's your job to figure out what are the key themes that come from that. You obviously analyze those 2 extracts or extract, analyze them through the lens of your argument and how you understand the text, and then kind of work that in and understand that extract is just an example, almost a replacement of the key theme, and maybe some aspects of form that are important in the text. So statement-based question like the one you're looking at here, a theme-based question or a direct rubric-based question, which is just a straightforward one. There's no like statement and then to what extent do you agree. It's just has a theme in there, or has a term like that. And then you also have the extract or excerpt questions, where you have quotes from the text, and they refer to those. So they're the 3 main types. In this case, the mistake would be to overemphasize the word engage. Okay, so when we engage with a text, the question we must ask ourselves is, what is this text really about? The question here even emphasizes this word really. What is it really about? So to me, the crux of the question is about the meaning of the text. And it's important to say it back to yourself in slightly different terms with synonyms. That's not to say use synonyms all the time in your essay, but say it back to yourself so that you're defining it to yourself. You know what those words mean to you, and that way you can use them the right way and in the most convenient way throughout your response. So if it says, what is this text really about? I'm thinking, okay, so it's saying like, what's the true meaning of the text? Okay, what's the true meaning of the text? What's the deeper meaning? Okay, really about, what's the deeper meaning? There's superficial meaning, there's a surface level understanding, and then there's a deeper understanding. Maybe there's like a hidden meaning, right? What is the text really about? Okay, hidden meaning. Maybe there's new meaning. Maybe there's a transformed meaning because I've now looked at another text and it's making me look at the original or earlier text. The later text is making me look at the earlier text differently. So the meaning is changing. The meaning is transforming. The meaning is malleable. Okay, so malleable, flexible, the truth of the text or the meaning of the text can change and evolve. It can evolve over time when you start looking at one text through a different contextual lens. If you look at a Shakespeare through a postmodern lens, so you're looking at one text that's an adaptation of Shakespeare, and then that's making you reinterpret the original Shakespeare, that's the meaning being transformed. Okay, so definitely looking at a later text can transform the meaning of the earlier text, which again is how I'm interpreting this whole statement. So yes, we not only ask ourselves, what is this really about? And this is how you can disagree with a question, because notice how it says we must ask ourselves. You could actually say, we not only must ask ourselves, but we're actually compelled to change, to transform our understanding. You don't just ask the question. Sometimes your interpretation and understanding of the earlier text, in fact, changes. So you could actually go even a bit further than what the question does. And the best students can actually do that with a statement question like this. So where it says, the question we must ask ourselves is this, the best students will be able to disagree when there's a clear disagreement with it, or they can agree and add something else. So the best phrase to add something else to the question is to say, not only. So, the question we must ask ourselves is not only what is this text really about, but was my previous understanding wrong or limited? Okay. Now we wouldn't say wrong, but limited is a good way of looking at it, right? To what extent was my previous understanding of the text limited by a narrow contextual perspective? Because now I'm looking at it through a new contextual lens. But yeah, we could also say the audience or the responder is invited to not only ask ourselves the question, but to also reinterpret the text as a whole. You don't just ask yourself, you actually do it. So if you can find those little nuances to differentiate yourself, so you're not just always blatantly agreeing with the question or disagreeing with it, but you're saying, yes, we have to do that, but also this, or yes, that's true, but it's not always true in this case. So if you can create that kind of caveat or qualification or extension to a statement, that's how you can set yourself apart. And don't do it if you don't have anything to actually say, but it's worth thinking about whether you have an additional point to make on that fits nicely with your understanding. Don't force it in if it's not going to work and you're not going to be able to back it up. But that's something definitely worth keeping in mind. Okay, and JeddAI with a G, thanks for sending through that example. We'll pull that up in a moment. But just to expand on this question a little bit further, if you looked at this statement here and you said, okay, engage is the key word. When we engage with the text, the question we must ask ourselves is, what is this text really about? If you focus too much on the word engage, because you're like, that's an important word, then you're more likely to miss the point. And when you're trying to answer the question in your essay, you're kind of going to miss the mark. You're going to be trying to get the word engage in there when actually the key thing that you were meant to get in there was this idea of questioning the meaning of the text. What is the text really about? What does it really mean? The true meaning of the text. For me, that's what I would be shaping everything around, is this idea of the original meaning, the transformed meaning. Why is it transforming? Because of contextual change. It's always going to be the same things here. You just need to be able to correctly identify the key words of the question, the crux of the question. For me, the crux of the question is about what is the earlier text really about? Because when you look at a later appropriated text, it can transform how you look at that original text. That's the crux of it. Now, again, if you overvalue a word like engage, then you're engaging with a text. When you read a text, when you respond to a text, it's not that important. It's kind of like, yes, they've just kind of thrown those words in there. I would almost not call any of those a key word, like any words from this part, because it's a distraction from the main thing. And it's most important. It's imperative, in fact, that you understand what the crux of the question is, the core term, and you focus all of your attention on that. If you can get the word engage occasionally in there, great, but only do it where it's convenient. Don't go out of your way to remold things around a word from this part of the question where I'm highlighting when the crux of the question is this part. So take the extra 10, 20 seconds to reread the question you're given for each essay and really be sure of what is the crux and what is less important. Because if you emphasize the wrong thing throughout, it's not going to be as strong a response, and you'll definitely get a worse mark for that. Okay, so I think I've hopefully elaborated enough. JeddAI, I should say GEDL, to distinguish here. But you've never seen it. How would you use it in the essay? You would basically work with the words really about, but I would often say, the later text compels responders to question the true meaning of the earlier text, and then you can obviously say something specific to the to the specific text that you're studying. So you can use words like really about. Really about is kind of informal. So I would use it occasionally to show that I'm directly answering the question, but that also gives you permission to use synonyms like true meaning, right? That's an exception to the rule where, I would almost always use the exact keywords of the question, but when it's a colloquial phrase or, it's kind of informal here, like what's the text really about? I don't want to keep saying really about, really about. I'll say it quite a lot, but I'll also make it clear like true meaning, transformed meaning, and then where I can get the whole idea of it transforms our understanding of what the text is really about. I'll try and work that in as much as possible, but I think anything on the meaning front would be sufficient to hit that. Again, as long as you emphasize that as the key part of the sentence, not other parts of the question that aren't as relevant. So that's the takeaway from that one. Okay. All right, you sent the weakest one in. Let me pull it up. Give me a second, guys. I'm going to pull up GEDL's submission here. Because you were the first one here, this is a special privilege. There were a lot of submissions, actually. And no doubt, because we're so close to the final exams, couple of weeks, you guys need to be deeply familiarizing yourself with your draft essays. I really hope that you've all timed your draft essays. I hope that you've all got a draft essay for each module. I hope you've got a draft for module C and you've contemplated the other scenarios of those other text types. And I hope you have sat down and timed each one out, or at least timed one of your essays, figured out what you can realistically write in 32 minutes as opposed to 40 minutes to give yourself plenty of time to answer the question on the day. And then I hope you've cut down all of the essays to that 32-minute mark based on that timed practice that you did. So I hope you've all done all of that. If you haven't done that, just sit down tonight, time out one of the essays, work out how many words it was because it's typed up, figure out how many minutes that took you to write, and then work out what your ideal word count would be to get that down mathematically to 32 minutes of time as opposed to maybe 40 minutes or 45 minutes. Once you've cut that down, the next week, I think, should be spent on heavily familiarizing yourself with your core materials. It doesn't mean you have to memorize it word for word. Familiarizing yourself with your core materials, thinking back to the text, and looking at different types of practice questions, putting yourself in the scenario of adapting your introduction, so writing a new introduction adapted from your base draft, and your topic sentences, and really working with some hard questions, what you consider to be tough questions, and forcing yourself to consider what you do in those scenarios. You do that now, it makes it easier on the day. You don't want to have the hard scenario, the worst case scenario happen on the day and not have already prepared yourself or put yourself in that uncomfortable position beforehand. So now's the time I'd be doing that and reading over your core materials and getting a really good sense of what your essays are about, what your core arguments are, and moving more towards kind of learning those really well so you're much faster on the day. Okay? So that's where you should be at with things. Let me, while we're doing this again, I'm pulling up GEDL's response here. I assume it's the, oh yeah, you can see it here. So have you submitted you've submitted for the Merchant of Venice, it looks like. Hopefully I'm getting that right. Just give me a second. And if anyone is keen to come on and join me in the chat on the live stream to talk through your concerns or questions or insights about the upcoming exams or otherwise, let me know. Just send through an email. We'll get you to join the live stream, because other students are going to be able to relate to that. I can speak to you as if you were representing all of the student JeddAIs out there, and that would definitely be helpful. So if someone's keen to actually come on and we can just chat through an example and you can ask questions pertaining to the exam, let's do that. But I am almost there with the prep here. Give me a second. Cool. All right, let's get into it. So, quick question from Ashton. Good to see you. Do markers deduct marks if you constantly repeat the words of the question and only occasionally use synonyms? No. So, using the key thing. Let's break up your question a little bit there. Notice how you said repeat the words of the question. Let's break that down. It's good to use the actual key terms of the question. It's not good to repeat the question. Okay. So, what's the difference? It's good to use the key terms of the question in a meaningful and specific way. It's not good to repeat the words of the question only. So you should use the words of the question, exact words of the question, but as you're alluding to in your question, you're kind of insinuating that, oh, if I use the actual key terms, I'm just repeating the question. Well, not quite. You should use the actual key term of the question, which might only be one word, like power. Or it might be a word or it might be two words like, what's the text really about? Should you use really about a lot? Yes, but you can also use synonyms for a phrase like that, like what's the true meaning, or the meaning changes or transforms. But if we think about a word like power or control as a keyword, you should use that word all the time, because that tells the marker that you're actually addressing the question. But to your point, you shouldn't just use the word power or control. You should expand. So it's use and expand, use and expand, land and expand, right? So if it's more memorable to you. So if you're all thinking about how do I use the key terms of the question without repeating the question, the answer is land on the actual keyword. Know what those keywords are. Land and expand. Okay, land and expand. So if the keyword is control, great, I'm going to use the word control. I'm not going to use a synonym. You're not tricking anyone by using a synonym. What are you telling me about control? Oh, political control. Okay, the political control over the collective. Okay, the power of political control over the collective to deprive individuals of autonomy. Okay, that's not repeating the question. I took the word control, landed on it, expanded by asking myself, what type of control? Political. Over who? Over the collective. Okay, and what about it? So what? I'm asking myself, what type? Over who? So what? I'm asking myself little mini questions here, because I'm going to use the actual keyword. I'm not using a synonym. I'm going to use the exact word like control, but I'm going to say something specific about it. And hopefully in your draft, you already have material that can help answer that mini question. Like, what about control? Well, hopefully you've already talked about control. Even if you didn't use the word control itself in your draft, you've probably talked about an idea that's related to control. So you can pull that material and use it to expand on the word control. So the power of, we said, political control over the collective to deprive individuals of their autonomy. That is a specific concept, but we haven't bothered using a synonym for control because we're saying so many specific things about it. Okay, so the reason why you use the actual keyword of the question in most cases is so it's clear to the marker that you're answering the question. They're very sensitive to memorized, regurgitated essays, okay? Regurgitated, memorized essays. They don't really care about memorized essays. They care about essays that don't answer the question. Students memorizing essays leads to them not answering the question, which is the issue. If you've memorized an essay and it happens to be the perfect response to the question you get, fantastic. Why would you get penalized for that, for having a memorized essay? But the problem is a lot of students learn these essays and then they go in and they just rewrite them, but they haven't included the actual key terms of the question. They haven't actually answered the question, which massively limits how well you can do. Like you're literally not ticking the main box, which is how will you respond to the question. You might have great language, you might have a great structure there, you might have used evidence really well, but you haven't answered the question. So yeah, you tick like 2 out of the 3 categories, but cap yourself at 14 or 15 max if it's like an amazing essay. So you have a base essay, you've timed it and cut it down so you're in an adaptation mindset on the day, and you've practiced adaptation before going into the exam. Then you get in there and you use the actual keywords of the question, of which there are only 1, maybe 2. In terms of the crux of the question, there's a couple of words that are really the key words. Maybe there's just one phrase. And then you use that phrase, but you always add more to it. You never just use a keyword. And if you get 2 keywords, you never just use the 2 keywords together. You never group keywords. So if the question said, the Merchant of Venice, how does the Merchant of Venice represent human motivations and behaviors? You will never say, or you should never say in your essays, motivations and behaviors together like that. You separate them, and if you can, you relate them to one another. Okay, so you say that an individual's self-serving motivations, now what would their motivation be? A self-serving motivation to belong to the community, right? That self-serving motivation to belong to the community incentivizes divisive behavior against any perceived others. Okay, so the self-serving motivation, I'm using the keyword motivation there, but I landed and expanded. I landed on motivation, but I expanded because I said the self-serving motivation to belong to the community can incentivize. Now I'm relating that to the word behavior. It can incentivize divisive behavior. Not just behavior, land and expand, divisive behavior. Okay, so self-serving motivations lead to divisive behaviors against others, against perceived others, capital O there, others, like someone who is seen as an anomaly, a perceived anomaly. So there we go. We can use that word from human experiences. And that is how you can separate and relate keywords that are in the question. So hopefully that helps in terms of guidance on that. Gettle, I know I'm keeping you waiting here in suspense, but some good questions coming through here. Just want to quickly get to this one. To what extent question, how often should I address the extent part? Is addressing it in every explanation overkill and too repetitive? Yes, you got to be careful with that one. I don't believe, personally, that to answer a to what extent question, you always need to be saying extent, right? Some teachers want to see that at some point. I believe you can easily answer that question without saying the word extent. To what extent does the text represent it? The text represents significantly, right? The text represents the significance of this. The text largely represents this, largely, right? It focuses on, it emphasizes, the text emphasizes this. If you say that, you're answering to what extent does it represent? You're saying it emphasizes it. I get it. Now, you might want to say the text or the author, strongly suggests. I don't have to say to a large extent. I can say the author strongly suggests, or the text significantly explores X, Y, and Z. But then I could also say, however, or the word but after a comma, or and yet. Those 3 are great terms to allow you to disagree with part of the to what extent. So now I know the extent. Okay, the text largely explores or significantly explores. The text demonstrates to a significant extent. Although again, I don't think you need to even say that. But the text strongly represents or strongly suggests this. However, see, so it goes from strongly suggests, comma, however, and that answers the to what extent. You see, strongly suggests, significantly represents the significance of, however, cautions against da 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 da, and you give a bit of a caveat, a bit of a qualifier. Like, it's not just significantly representing that, it's actually also saying be careful with that because this can also happen. So not a good phrase as well for to what extent, not only, but also. not only does this, but also this. Shows that you're able to understand the nuances of it, the text, that it doesn't just do that, it also does that. So keep that in mind with your wording. Look at this incredible feedback. Yes, keywords, thanks for the help. Short response tutorial, 19 out of 20. Incredible results all around. We've had some great feedback on that, so appreciate that, Ashton. I'm gonna capture that one. I just did a smiley face with your comment. Okay, so let's share the screen, and please, if you can, leave a review on JeddAI's Google reviews if you found any of the content helpful. Okay, like these kind of things are super helpful for us, so would appreciate that. It's on Google reviews. Search JeddAI. Google Maps, I think you got to go through to do that one, so would appreciate that. Let's go to Mr. Gettle, a go-getter, as I understand it. And the go-getting by Mr. Go-Gettle, or Miss Go-Gettle, has led to a bit of priority here because they were in here first, and now we're going to break down what I think here is a body paragraph, okay? So the question is, explain how individual and collective human experiences challenge human behaviors and motivations. We were just talking about motivations and behaviors, so great timing. Maybe that was subconscious because I copy-pasted over before. Then I use that as an example, probably, but I wasn't really conscious of it when I was doing it. Now, there is individual and collective. See how there are seemingly quite a few keywords here? See how I'm highlighting these and you're suddenly like, oh, there are 4 keywords I have to get into the sentence. If you try and think about it like that, you're just going to repeat the whole sentence. You're going to repeat. You're not going to land and expand. You don't want to try and expand on 4 key terms in one sentence. That's why you have to understand what the keywords are. The keywords here, can you see them? Could you know what the keywords are? There's only 2. There's not 4. I've highlighted 4 because they're the ones that kind of popped out as specific terms. But the crux of the question relates to 2 of those 4. It's behaviors and motivations. Forget about the word human even. Of course it's human. It's all human experiences for this module, right? But behaviors and motivations, they're the 2 words. I'm never going to use them together. I'm going to separate them, but I'm going to really focus on that. The fact that an experience is individual and collective, great. You know, we care, but like not as much as the crux of the question, which is about behaviors and motivations, okay? Now, what type of human experience are we dealing with? You know, you can say what it is and whether it happened to be individual or collective, but that's not as key as the idea of what types of behaviors and motivations and how do those 2 things link together or relate to each other. And I gave you an example before of how they could relate to one another, right? Is this an actual question that you got, Gettle? I mean, in terms of keywords, I mean, you've jammed in this one. How has the form of your prescribed text influenced the composer's representation of motivations and behaviors? So really there are 3 keywords because unless, wait, hang on a second. Yeah, I mean, there seems to be 2 different questions. Did you give me 2 questions? Maybe I've just pasted it in incorrectly. You said to respond to that. It's just 2 questions. Okay. Yeah, okay. I don't know why I got 2 questions. It should just be 1. I don't know which one were you actually responding to, or did you just not really respond to any and you threw in two random ones there? Yeah, because you kind of, the way it presented was that you got 2 sentences. I used the first one mainly. Okay, well, first of all, when you guys do a practice question, just have 1 question. And, you know, if you want to have form as part of it, great, do that. But that should be it. Don't overcomplicate it. All right, let me just get rid of that so you can all see everything. All right, so how is the form of your prescribed text? Yeah, look, this is a better one, to be honest. It just is a little bit more helpful if I go through that one. Because it's the same keywords, but there's actually 3 keywords now. The crux of the question is still motivations and behaviors, but the form element cannot be ignored. We have to address that whenever we're talking about the how. Like, how is it actually done this? You know, the fact that it's a play, the fact that it subverts the comedic genre, right? That it's got tragic elements in it. Does it have soliloquies? Yes. Okay, soliloquies are unique to the dramatic form. Talk about the importance of that. So that's the how. That's to do with the technique and the style and how it's been put together. And then in terms of what you're actually exploring, what you're going to argue, the ideas, motivations and behaviors is the crux of the question. Form is something we will address throughout as well, but it's kind of related to the how, not the what it's about. Okay. Okay, so collective marginalization motivates both vengeful behavior. Okay, I like that you've done vengeful behavior. Can everyone see this example of land and expand? Look at that. Land and expand. Here, I'll do the expand part in blue. So see that blue? Vengeful behavior. That's an example of not just repeating the keyword, but actually adding to it, expanding on it by saying what type of behavior. Collective marginalization motivates both. Oh, and look at this subtle thing. The collective marginalization motivates that behavior. So there is the linkage between motivations and behavior, which I like. Again, we haven't said motivation and behavior. We've said that motivates this. So we've got something being motivated by something else. So that's the way you've used motivates and behavior. You've separated them, even though they're within a few words of each other. You haven't said and. You've actually got a causation going on there. And that works well in terms of the first part. Okay, so collective marginalization, that allows you to say what is motivating someone. So collective marginalization, that's the expand, motivates both vengeful behavior and the pursuit of autonomy. Okay, so two types of behavior, I guess you're saying. Vengeful behavior and autonomous behavior. Both vengeful behavior and the pursuit of autonomy. Yeah, I mean, you could go both vengeful and autonomous, like, you know, and you might say maybe that's paradoxical, maybe it's not, but you could think about that as well. Have a think whether that would work. Because this pursuit of autonomy is a type of behavior as well. Now you're probably asking, but isn't that repetitive? Isn't that a bit much? Well, it's rare to do too much answering the question, but let's think about it for a second. Collective marginalization motivates both vengeful behavior and autonomous behavior, as seen in Shylock's dehumanization and Portia's patriarchal constraints. So look, you've got the double end going on here. I'm not a fan of too many ends in one sentence. You've also like listed off the example here. If this is your topic sentence, which it looks like it is because you've got your evidence coming in after it, and maybe I'll just number that. Right, so you got your first bit of evidence there, and then so forth. It goes on, it seems. I'm just going to space this out. Now, I wouldn't necessarily mention the two characters as the examples. You can do that sometimes, but I like the strong concept. Then you bring in the relevant characters that happen to be part of your examples in your analysis, right? So you don't have to focus on the characters or list them off. I'm not a fan of this listing here. You're saying as seen in the dehumanization and patriarchal constraints, right? If you can kind of extrapolate that a little bit more, not mention Shylock, not mention Portia, because you're going to mention those characters here, I can see. See, you already mentioned them there. You don't need to say as seen in. You're going to tell me as seen in. You're there. So don't list that off. It's a topic sentence. It doesn't mean you have to foreshadow the exact characters that are going to be in your evidence. The best topic sentences will be more concept driven. So collective marginalization motivates vengeful behavior. Now you could end it there. I'm just like, these kind of punchy, specific, relevant statements as topic sentences can be really powerful if done the right way. This one kind of nails it because you've said the motivations, the behavior. You haven't said the form thing, and you're all probably thinking, well, what about the form thing? Okay, we would get to that. We would at least do it by the second sentence, but I would probably actually want it in the topic sentence, to be honest. But if you wanted to do a sentence like what you have here, where you didn't mention the form, because you said, I think you're mainly doing the first question before, so fair enough. You know, we would, if you were doing this or what I've cut it down to, I would go with the cut down version and focus on the more specific points after. So collective marginalization motivates vengeful behavior. And instead of saying vengeful behavior, again, you could say not only, right? Collective marginalization motivates vengeful behavior, but also the pursuit, if we want to keep this, okay, vengeful behavior, but also the pursuit of autonomy. Okay, again, not really a paradox as such, so we can't add that in. We don't want to force anything that doesn't seem to work. But yeah, but also the pursuit of autonomy just adds that, instead of just saying this and this, it motivates vengeful behavior, but also the pursuit of autonomy. Great. Now the question is, well, how do we get that form part in? And sometimes you do need to mention the text, which is fine, right? So if we wanted to then get the form part in, because I would again recommend pulling that into the topic sentence, right? Let's think generally about the form, right? Through the dramatic form. Now, what about the dramatic form is always my question. Like, it's fine to say dramatic form because it's a play, right? It's always better to say something specific about it. So what's going to allow Shakespeare to better represent this idea, vengeful behavior, the fact that it's dramatic? I mean, what about it? The fact that you watch it in, live in a theater, that's quite confronting, right? So it helps you understand the nature of the vengeance. You're like seeing it firsthand. So we could say through something about the dramatic form, through the visceral nature of the dramatic form, you see? And this bit is this is our land and expand here, okay? This is our land and expand. I've landed on form because form was the key word in orange, see, form and form. But I expanded on it because I didn't want to just say through the form or even just through the dramatic form. We said through the visceral nature, which means you feel it in your body because you watch a play in person. So it's very specific to it. Then we have to adjust this. We have to say Shakespeare, right? Through the visceral nature, you don't have to mention the play necessarily. You say Shakespeare heightens our understanding, or we could say, I'm just looking up here, represents the power for, because up here it says representation of, represents the power of collective, I love the phrase the power of, it's so effective, represents the power of collective marginalization to motivate vengeful behavior, but also the pursuit of autonomy. This is sounding pretty good now. If you look at it, we've hit all three keywords, expanded on all three keywords, and given quite a punchy statement. So you tell me if that makes sense in terms of, versus what you had. Okay, so this was like before. I'll put this back up. You kind of had this. And again, we didn't want this because that's like an example. You're listing off examples. So hopefully that makes sense why you don't want that. And now we want to prioritize the form part. And I like adding form in as a clause at the start. Then we can mention Shakespeare. We're not going into any characters or specific examples. And we'll mention the dehumanization and patriarchal stuff when we go through the analysis. So that topic sentence work we just did is super important. It's the most important thing because that sets the tone of your whole paragraph. It's going to obviously introduce the key concept, but it's also going to create that impression on the marker. Like, are you an A grade student? Are you band 6? Are you at the top level here, or are you just kind of listing things off, referring to characters? It doesn't have that edge, right? This one actually hits all the terms of the question in an expansive way, and it provides kind of one concrete point without listing multiple things. So that's why that would be an improved topic sentence. So let me know what you think about that. Yeah, I never really understood how to use form in a topic sentence is the comment. So now you know. It's really effective to use it as a clause at the start, through the, right? Or by leveraging or facilitated by the dramatic form. But try and say something about it. You could say through the use of soliloquies as part of the dramatic form. You see, keep mentioning form, but keep saying something specific about it. That's really important. You just have to do that 3 times. You do that one per topic sentence, and obviously make sure you use something that's actually relevant to that particular point and paragraph, and that you have, at least one example of in a little bit more detail. Quick question here, like how many characters are we expected to touch upon in our essays? I really would advise against being overly character driven. Yes, you could be asked about characterization or a protagonist for a critical study type of essay. It could come up, but generally speaking, it's not really about ticking off characters. It's about having a great concept. I personally would advise not having just one main character that you look at throughout the whole of the essay, because you need to acknowledge the importance of other characters. And unless your text is one that really only has one key person, you pretty much all will have to mention someone else, because it shows a greater understanding of the theme, right? If you only understand the theme or the idea through one character, maybe you don't understand it that deeply. If you can understand how it relates to other characters, that shows a broader understanding, deeper understanding. So that's why you would have more than one character, but don't treat that as the main thing. As I said, you shouldn't even be really referencing characters unless they're mentioned in the essay question in a topic sentence. Okay, but to answer your question, it's at least two, because you never just want to be character limited. You only talk about one character in the whole play. You always want to refer to someone else. I think three is nice. If you have kind of one main character or protagonist, this is the typical trend, but you at least refer to a couple of other characters. I never use that as a focus point. It just happens. Like when you want to find good evidence, it typically doesn't just relate to one character, or maybe it relates to them, but maybe the quotes aren't all said by one character. So you'll find that you might have multiple characters referenced, which is great, but it's not the main thing to really focus on. It should just naturally happen. You do want to check through that you don't just have evidence on one character and you don't mention any other characters or have quotes by anyone other than that one character. That's just too limited, and you're kind of missing the bigger picture of the ideas that go beyond that character. So it should naturally happen that you have multiple. It would be at least three, I would think, for any text. But yeah, it's something to maybe check off at the end and make sure you've got enough diversity, but don't make that the main priority. Okay, so and I said before I wouldn't look at necessarily all of it, but I want to have a look at a sentence of analysis at least here. So Shylock's soliloquy utilizes anaphora or anaphora, some say, which is just a type of repetition, for those of you wondering. So in this case, the repetition of the same words at the beginning of two consecutive clauses or lines, if you, right? So that is anaphora. And inclusive language. So you kind of grouped two techniques here. Shylock's soliloquy utilizes anaphora and inclusive language in if you, and you kind of segue into your quote by saying in, which is fine as a starting point, but you might want to work on, like, it can be tricky because you've got to keep the if you, but like I would work on integrating that in more seamlessly. So an example would be when or as he asserts. Shylock's soliloquy utilizes anaphora and inclusive language as he asserts or as he cautions if you poison us. Just thinking as he cautions, sounds like he's cautioning here. If you prick us, if you poison us. As he cautions that if you prick us, if you poison us. Yeah, doesn't really like finish the sentence, but as he or when he asserts that if you So yeah, work on the transition into the quote if you can. That's just an example. To expose the religious division in Venetian society, okay, if you prick us, if you poison us, does the anaphora and inclusive language, how does that relate to religious division? If you prick us, if you poison us, I guess you and us, is that what you're saying? Us, the religious division, I can see that. But you kind of just drop that. So you say, okay, there's a religious division. Then you say the word and that's the main thing I would pull you up on there. It's like you're kind of half saying one point. Okay, you're telling me there's a religious division. That's not that insightful, if I'm speaking bluntly. I get, it looks like you've said something quite significant because it's all of this. But actually, you've split it up into just this. So I'm just looking at this thinking, how deep is this concept? The religious division in society. Okay, if that's all you're saying, that's not that insightful. Tell me about it. So what that there's a religious division, right? Okay, because you said the word end, it sounds like you've done a half point. This is like a half point, and now you're going to tell me another half point and reveal how the collective exclusion of Jews fuels his vengeful behavior. Okay, or if you do this, if you do this. I think it's more of like, yeah, I guess fuels, or I would use motivates if you haven't already used it in the sentence. But you're probably thinking, oh, but I used it in the topic sentence. Doesn't matter. If it's a keyword of the question, you use it wherever you can. You use it wherever you can, as long as you land and expand. Motivates what? His vengeful behavior. Okay. You said vengeful up here, so you might want to use, a slightly different word. You don't want to necessarily repeat the same type of behavior, but it's fine to keep mentioning motivate, motivation, motivational, and behavior. But I would try and mix up this word. Okay. So what was I saying? You've kind of got half a point here that's not really that insightful, if you can see that. And the word end is kind of the blocker there. So try not to use the word end in an explanation, and instead connect these two things. So let's see if we can do it. To expose the religious division in Venetian society as a catalyst. It exposes that as a catalyst for something else. Give me a cause and effect. You've just given me a cause, religious division. So what? Tell me about it. What does that create? It says if you poison us, if you prick us, right? To expose the religious division in Venetian society, to expose, I'll get rid of the, just to say, to expose religious division in Venetian society as a motivation, right? As a motivation for, because you say collective exclusion, aren't you kind of repeating yourself there? So you probably want to either say religious division, you either want to say religious division or be specific and say the collective exclusion of Jews. For me, these two things are so similar, you see? So you're kind of repeating yourself. When you really dig into your sentences, you'll start seeing this stuff. I would pick one of those, okay? For me, the more specific one is the collective exclusion of Jews, right? To expose the collective exclusion of Jews as a cultural motivation, because it's like a cultural factor, right? As a cultural motivation for, and is it just revenge? Again, you might want to say something more specific than just vengeful behavior, because that's what you said above, right? And you said dehumanization, which I liked, the collective dehumanization. If you prick us, if you poison us, it's kind of like dehumanizing them as well, right? Or persecution, like seems to be most related to the idea of pricking and poisoning. Good to use language that relates very specifically to the quote that you are using. And it's a nice quote. If you prick us, if you poison us, we'll do this. Collective persecution of Jews as a cultural motivation. Why? Land and expand. Motivation, cultural motivation. Why not? It makes sense. It's a cultural motivation or a religious motivation. It is cultural and religious, so either of those work. But again, the idea being that you're getting a specific term before the keyword, but you always want to use the keyword. And then you want to go into this idea of if you do this, if you do this. He's really threatening, right? As a motivation for, we could say like embittered or violent violent reaction. Because you had vengeful behavior, it's not like super. It's not adding any more specific insight than this original one in the topic sentence. As a cultural motivation, I'm just looking at the words there. If you prick us, if you poison us. It sounds like they're going to retaliate, right? For reciprocated violence. Why reciprocated violence? Because it's saying if you prick us, if you do this, I'll do this, is what he goes on to say, right? If you prick and poison, that's violent behavior. So if you do it, I'll do it. That's reciprocal. So again, I'm just trying to dial in the language here. So it's so specific to the words of the quote, right? See how we're doing that? This takes a while to do sometimes. But if you can really dial it in and not use generic language, but use language that really makes sense. Why am I saying violence? Because of poison and prick. Why am I saying reciprocated? Because he says, if you do this, I'll do this. I'll retaliate. So you could have said retaliatory behavior as a cultural motivation for reciprocal or reciprocated violence. Okay, that sounds nice. So we'll just get rid of everything else. Okay. But you see, the reciprocated is the if you, then will do this. Okay. And that's the really key kind of word there. Reciprocated, and it's that if you, which relates to your anaphora point. Okay, hope I'm making sense. Look at all the purple. I'm trying to point out all the linkages between your technique, your quote, and then what you actually say about it, because you were missing a bit of that by just saying, vengeful behavior was right, but we want to mix it up from the topic sentence and make it a little bit more specific and sophisticated in that way. Okay, you've already got reciprocation somewhere. I talk a lot about it in my second and last paragraph. Well, you can use a different word. What did we say before? Retaliatory. Like retaliating is fine as well. Yeah. So you can pick a different word, but you get my point. Hopefully, about sharpening up the effect, dialing it in with the quote. That's how you can rephrase that. All right, cool. Well, I hope that helps. That's a good example for all of you of how to improve your topic sentences. Then there's the sentence of analysis to sharpen up, which is really important. So, go Gettle. Appreciate you submitting that. And then I've got Alfex returns. If I submitted the paragraph on the form, is there an order for which you review it? Yeah, so I did give special privilege here to Gettle because they were here first and sitting in there. First one to comment. Always gets special rights here, 740. But yeah, generally I will go through them in the order in which they're submitted recently, as long as they're not too long. As I said, if you submit like 2 paragraphs jammed into one, then we won't look at it because it's just not realistic to get through in this time. And I like to do more detailed feedback, as you know, like I just did, rather than giving you useless commentary that won't actually allow you to improve. So that's the approach. Yeah, of course, you can use what I just helped you with. So hopefully you took note of that. You can use all of it. Go for it. Guys, make sure you check out JeddAI.com as well if you haven't already had access to the resources. You can go to the close analysis sections, and it has those packaged up analysis sentences all ready to go. So if you need to improve the quality of your analysis, that's what we've built into the JeddAI resources. So on JeddAI.com, that is what we have on there. So check that out if you need to improve your body paragraphs specifically. There's some great analysis in there for different scenes just to immediately give you that improvement, especially a couple weeks out. So that's on JeddAI.com. Find your resources. It's all there. Okay. Back to Alf. Sorry, I'm not ignoring your question. I'm going to have a look for it. Did you submit it under this name? Tell me when you submitted it, Alfex returns, and I can give you a sense of when we can get to that, even try and prioritize it for you. I do try and prioritize the people who submit who are then in the live stream as well, as I just did. So try and make some exceptions where we can. But if you're in the chat ready to listen to the feedback, that's always going to give you a good chance of getting reviewed. I saw an Instagram reel that sounded like they were singing your name, like what JeddAI. You'll have to send me that Instagram reel. That sounds hilarious. I doubt it was singing my name, but it sounds funny. Send the link on the chat if you've got it. This is Spoz on Switch. Yes, they were. It sounded 100% right. Well, you got to share a copy. Did they tag JeddAI? That's some classic material there. I might have to package that up. Yeah, if you can find that, I'd appreciate that because that's funny. Do you recommend writing a base discursive essay that can be adapted to persuasive or imaginative? I'm just reading this one. Okay. Do you recommend writing a base discursive essay that can be adapted to persuasive or imaginative essays, or 2 separate essays, one for discursive that can be turned into persuasive and one imaginative? Yeah, so I like, my preference would be a discursive base that has imaginative elements in it. So it's like a hybrid. And then it's very easy to adapt that to a persuasive, but I would still, I wouldn't take that for granted. I would practice that and have gone through the motions of doing it and knowing what I would have to change and what my argument would then be. So you do need to actually change the tone and the argument that you're making, because you go from being contemplative in the discursive to being very trying to convince, and you're trying to be persuasive, but you need to persuade towards a particular perspective versus contemplating different perspectives. So you do need to manipulate the overall kind of structure and how it's working. It will be very similar in terms of the wording, but you still need to be angling towards one perspective being right and the other, and kind of looking at other perspectives, but then ultimately arguing for one of them. So you need to be clear on how you would go about that. With the persuasive. And then with the imaginative, I would already want to have a lot of imaginative components in the discursive, but I would also have planned out what I would do in that situation, especially maybe with a different opening that's a little bit more set in and character based. So you establish the protagonist, the setting, and then you use as much as possible, that works with the discursive. But it's hard to make a general rule here. That's how I would approach it, but I would definitely be ready to have a slightly different approach on the imaginative, more so than the persuasive. Going from a discursive to a persuasive is much easier than going from either of those two to an imaginative. So the imaginative is the one you might need to have a little bit more work on to kind of have a slightly different scenario, but still borrow as much as you can from the discursive if you can, right? So yeah, that's kind of the reality of it. It was by chance the rapper. What do you mean? Like in terms of we're trying to track down this clip. If we can find it. If you can't, it is what it is. It's all good. Okay, so how do I respond to an extract question with a base essay when the extract doesn't relate? How do I respond to an extract question with a base essay when the extract doesn't relate? I watched a video where you gave some sentence structures for the intro, topic, sentence, link, and conclusion. Yeah, so I have what I think is a really good video on how to adapt to an extract question or how to handle the next question. You're saying, the problem is in the question here, right? This is classic case of assuming that it didn't work, right? How do I respond to an extract question with a base essay when the extract doesn't relate? The extract does relate. That's the issue. And you're thinking, but you haven't seen my base essay. It doesn't matter. It's a mindset. It's always a mindset. Now, am I being delusional? To an extent, but I want to interpret the extract in the best way possible for me. No one tells you on the day how you're meant to interpret that extract. They're going to pick an extract that is a pretty important one. It's going to be an example of some key ideas from the text. You need to spot where the parts are or how you could interpret that to relate to your key argument, what you want to say in your essay, okay? So it's actually more of a mindset of saying, this is great. I always say, this is a great extract for my essay. Here's how, and then I find how. That's my job. I'm looking for how it could work. I'm not just looking at the extract and thinking it doesn't work. I'm just saying it does work. Now I'm looking at it to see how it works. Okay, that might sound silly, but that's literally how you have to think about it, because it's about your focus. What are you focusing on? I just focus on the things that would work for me. Whereas some students, they look at an extract and go, oh, that doesn't work for my essay. No, it does. That extract is working for you. You don't work for the extract. And that mindset is incredibly important. So it actually starts with the way you're thinking about it. Otherwise, it's hard for me to answer the question. How do you answer a question where the extract doesn't relate? I mean, my answer is it does relate. It always relates. It might not relate as strongly or as clearly as you can see at first, or that you would like, but you have to interpret it in the best way possible for you. Find the parts that work best with your argument, and you need to rephrase your existing draft, potentially substantially, to still make a similar point. You still got the same argument, but you're prioritizing maybe that slightly different focus that still relates to your key themes. The main thing is to look at it with a very kind of broad lens. Be very flexible with how you interpret an extract. no one's telling you how you have to interpret it. They give you the extract and say, how does use with reference to that extract answer this question? So you can look at the extract and then think, what are the key parts of that would work best for me? Okay, and that's your job to make it work. So it sounds like what you need to do is a bit more practice, and I mean that in the best way. Like if you actually practice that a few more times, I bet you would start seeing some things that you might not have otherwise seen that actually could make it work quite well for you. And that might not be super satisfactory. If you're talking specifically about a poem situation, I'm glad you brought that up. If they've given you an extract from a poem that's not one of your three, that doesn't mean that the ones you've talked about are not relevant, because you're studying Eliot's, if it's for Eliot, you're studying the poetry as a whole, and you have three key examples about that poetry as a whole. You happen to get an extract from one of the other ones, number 4 or 5, and you didn't have them as your primary focus. Okay, so you can still keep majority of what you have as long as you are connecting them to the ideas of the extract from the other poem. Again, you're just using the other extract as an example of the overall ideas that relate to all of the poems in some way, and it's your job to work out that connection. In terms of specifically referencing the poem, yes, you will need to do it. And in the case of T.S. Eliot, and at first I was talking generally, but now you've mentioned this like poetry situation. I get it. You want to know where each of those other poems would best fit into your argument. So if you've got 3 poems, 1 per paragraph, and you've not talked about 2 of the poems, and they're the ones you're worried about with the extracts, you still need to know roughly what those are about and which paragraphs, which ideas they best fit into. Like, where would that go into? You should know that in advance. So if you get an extract and you need to use it, you just talk about that poem in that paragraph that you already knew in advance. That fits best in there. That becomes your primary focus. You drop some of the evidence from the other poem, and you'd have to do some on-the-spot analysis if you didn't have anything else prepped on that poem. I always have 2 to 3 backup quotes for the 2 poems that I'm not using. I'd probably have 3 ideally. But in any case, you have a quick look at some of the lines from the extract, figure out like a comprehension task, what a couple of techniques are there, and then work it into your argument, replacing what you had before with what's now there. And you can still use the rest of what you had, but still come back to the key ideas of that extract in each paragraph more generally. But you don't have to only analyze that poem in every paragraph. You can just have one main paragraph where you've substituted it into, and then you can refer to the idea of the extract, which represents Eliot's poetry as a whole, in the other ones, but you only talk about the other poems you already had. So I hope that makes sense. All right, so hang on a second. We've got an update. We've got an update, I think, or maybe we don't. We've got Chance the Rapper. They start chanting. Okay, I still don't know if you've got the link. Would love to see it. Otherwise, I want to give up on that one. All right. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. So what would you say is the best thing to do with approximately 2 weeks out from the HSC? Love the vids. Appreciate the feedback. Glad you like the vids. Best thing to do with approximately 2 weeks out. Okay, so again, the way I think about English is a process. So just quickly going through the things. I would go through this checklist. Okay, I'll go through a checklist and make sure I'm ticking these off as soon as possible in this order. Have I cut down all of my essays after timing them, at least timing one of them, and figuring out how many words can I write in 32 minutes for a 40-minute essay on average, right? 40 minutes, how much can I do in 32 minutes? Once I have that exact number, have I cut everything down? If I haven't, that's the first thing I'm doing. And I'm doing that as soon as possible. I'm doing that now. I'm doing that yesterday, right? But do it as soon as possible. Once you've cut them down, you now need to enter a stage of familiarization. You're reading over your essays, and hopefully you've already been doing this while trying to edit them and improve them. So you're getting familiar with each of your essays. Don't do them all at once. Just focus on one at a time, one per day if you like. you're familiarizing it, you're reading through it, and you're then doing practice adaptation questions. So that means you line up 3 different types of questions, for example, that relate to one of the modules. Say it's human experiences. Okay, you get 3 different human experiences questions, 3 different types of questions, including one that you feel uncomfortable about, one that you think is, easier, and then one in the middle, or just 3 different styles. And look at the past paper, look at past HSC and past trial questions to get a variety of those. And then what you do is you mainly do introductions and topic sentences based off your original draft, and then you're adapting them to those different styles of questions. And you're doing introductions and the 3 topic sentences, or 4, however many it may be, as a priority, because then it's more efficient. They're the most important parts that need to be adapted. Everything else needs to be answering the question, but they're the things that give you the most bang for your buck. And it means you're not going to spend hours and hours constantly doing full essays every time. So rereading over your essays, read them out loud. So you've timed your essays, cut them down. Now you're reading them out loud. You're finding spots where it just doesn't flow. You're going to find little errors. You're going to fix things up. Great. That's also going to help you cut things down and make it super sharp. It'll also make it easy to remember because it's shorter. And you are then, while familiarizing them, doing sets of questions with introductions and topic sentences for each specific essay. And then I would be doing that over the next few days, next 3 to 5 days, just doing a lot of that familiarization. Then I'm giving myself a solid week to learn all of my base essays to the extent that I'm comfortable with it. It doesn't have to be word for word. Not everyone should or can learn 3 full essays word for word. That's really onerous, and it's not necessarily the best way to do it. I think it's good to have a really good understanding of what you are writing in every sentence, but you don't need to have it word for word. Most students should probably know the majority of their essays, right? But you don't need to know every single little word. I like to do it because it just gives me a really good safety net. So if you want to do that, great. If you are a slow memorizer, even just to learn your core quotes, to learn just the basic points you want to make, you have to allow more time. Maybe you need to start that now because you've got, 2 weeks and a couple of days if you're doing the HSC. So 2 weeks and change, that might be the amount of time that some of you need to actually learn 3 essays, a core module C draft with a couple of variations and a reflection, and do practice short answers. So between now and 5 days time, I'm doing that familiarization adaptation, and then I'm just getting into gear with learning all those core materials so that 2 days out from the exam, I know everything. I want to know everything. I want to be ready to go 2 full days out. So by Tuesday, then you've got so by Monday night, I should say, then Tuesday, Wednesday before your English exam, you can just do some practice questions, adaptation, all your base materials. You can look at some worst case scenarios and plan those out, think about them, just sit and think about them, dot point what you do in that situation, brainstorm them with a couple of friends, and then remind yourself of the essays and the materials so you don't forget them. So you're going over them, you're going over some worst case scenarios, you're doing short answers, and you should pepper those in a little bit as well. There's quite a lot to cover there, obviously. But at this point, towards a couple of days out, you're familiar with all your essays, you've done the memorization that you're going to do, ideally, and then you're doing some short answers and doing worst case scenarios, and just going back over those essays. That's really it. Adaptation, worst case scenarios, going over your essays and doing some short answers. That'll cover all 5 sections on the day. You've thought about all possibilities. You get in there on the day and it's just another question. You've already done all the practice. Your base essay, so you're going to be super fast. You have cut down your essays to 32 minutes, so you have plenty of time and plenty of mental space, plenty of focus on the question. So you're not going to run out of time. You're going to finish the paper. Beautiful. If you do all those steps right, amazing. What's the thing that's going to give you the biggest bang for buck if you're only going to do one of those things that I just went through? Definitely just learn as much as you can of your base essays and the module C, and be very mindful of cutting them down as much as possible. Cut those essays down as much as possible. Learn them as well as you can. Use the next whole 2 weeks if you have to, while studying for your other subjects, to do that. But really ramp it up as you get closer to 1 week out from the exam. You definitely want to already know quite a lot of your materials by then. So that's what I'd be doing at this point in time. it's all subjective as well. Like, that's the process, but some of you need to start on the memorization right now. Some of you can wait a few more days and you can focus more on that just gradual familiarization. So it's going to be easy for you to learn later, and just doing practice questions and practice introductions, and you're going to be better on the day at that. Okay. Sorry, guys, just going through the chat, seeing what's happening. So, so you've got the. I'm just following the this trailer. Actually, I'm really curious to see this video. It's the narcissist in me. Okay, it's there. I try to bury that thing, but I'm too curious about this one. You can email it. So the email is hello@jeddal.com. And that's actually an interesting question. How do you get a job at JeddAI? Hey, when you guys finish your exams, hit me up if you actually would like to work at JeddAI, work with the team at some point. It might be marketing, it might be sales, it might be helping us with product. So anything in that area. Maybe some of you are really good at code and you're interested in AI and you want to be on that side of things. You should definitely send an email, hello@jeddal.com, and get the interest in early if you want to work with the team. But my advice to you, if you want to work, because we only hire a few people, at it each year. If you want to work, send through like an example of your best work. Don't rush to do this before your exams. I don't want you to do that. Once you finish your exams, or even now, you can send an expression of interest. But later on, send through an example of your best work on whatever it is. Send through like an app you've made, or send through a cool JeddAI video that you've edited or something yourself. Like, show us an example of something. That's the best way to. That's how you get a job, is send through an example of doing something that would be valuable. And thank you very much for sending that, Spaz. All right, Alf, I'm going to find that for you. Did you resend it, or was I meant to? Hang on a second. Are you year 11, Alf? Are you the recent one? Because I was kind of just looking at the recent thing, but what am I looking for? What's your name on the thing? How am I going to identify that? Oh, yeah, I've got you. I've got you now. Okay, you're a couple back. Okay, that is a giant paragraph, but fair play. I might not go through that whole thing when I do it, but I have located it, which is good. 1984, right? Okay. Okay, cool. I'll see if I can get to it. Let's just see what else we got here, and then I might finish on that one. I don't want to put it off because then I might not get to it next time. All right, so I'm going to pull up the alpha response, and I think I found the one. Just confirm with me it's the 1984 one. You don't remember? Oh, you remember something else? Hopefully you remember which one it was. Oh, I think it was Mod A. Right. But as long as you know you did the 1984 one with, I saw like, was it mesodiplosis? You got some big techniques in there, which you don't have to do, but sometimes it can work well. I'll come to that after. So there we go. Well, look at this. Put it. I mean, yeah, I know you emailed the link, but you should do a follow up email, and we'll put you on the expressions of interest. Got YouTube experience. Always good to have some video editors. Trying to do more and more content. Hey, you can get our Twitch started maybe, or something. We've got to do more of these live streams. We've got to build these up. Yes, we are going through people's paras eventually between doing some Q&A for everyone else that's here. All right. Are there any phrases that will work? Oh yeah. Okay. This is a good one. So, are there any phrases that will work for any question when adapting if you are stuck on the spot besides using my pre-planned analysis? Yeah, because again, to avoid this situation happening a lot, at least, like it might happen occasionally, but you don't want it to happen a lot. It'll happen a lot if you're rushing because you haven't cut down the draft essays and you don't have much time to spare. But if you know you have 32-minute drafts, you have more mental space to avoid this, right? So just keep that in mind as a kind of higher level thing. The better you actually prepare beforehand by cutting things down, the more and practicing doing this more, the less likely it is that it's going to happen, which probably sounds obvious, but that's really important because what you're asking for here is more of a tactic to use on the spot, on the day, when this happens. But the best advice I can give you is to avoid it happening, have already done the prep work, which is have a much shorter essay that you've cut down and have done practice adaptation for each part of your essay, including the analysis at times, and then it won't happen. But if it does happen, I do want to give you the actual tactic here. So are there any phrases that will work for any question? Well, if you're trying to adapt and it's in your analysis, are you talking specifically about like the quotes that you're analyzing and you need to make it work with the question? Because the trick there is to locate the most relevant part of your existing sentence. It's to locate the relevant part of your existing sentence, what you were planning on writing. So you're like, okay, that theme there relates to where I've talked about the idea in my sentence. Okay, you've located it. It's towards the end of my sentence. It's not about changing my quote. Obviously, my quote's my quote. I'm going to look at the last part of my sentence, and then from there, I find the most relevant word. And then in terms of that rephrasing, like it would depend on the type of word. It's very hard for me to give you a general phrase, but if you're looking at a theme word, say it's human motivations, I like the phrase "the power of," and it came up earlier, right? The power of. So then you can say the power of adjective motivation. So see if you follow me there. The power. This evidence suggests the power of political motivations. Political was the insert there, it's an adjective. The power of political motivations, if motivations was the key word of the question. So notice I did the land and expand strategy. I used the power of that to the power of political motivations to disempower the collective, for instance, okay? Something that relates to your quote and your evidence, ideally. But that's a good phrase that I would recommend you try use. It's also really helpful for short answers when you're doing section 1, the reading task. The power of this reveals the power of X to do Y, and it's a cause and effect statement. So always go for cause and effect as a in terms of a template, and you can use a phrase like the power of to do that. Now, suppose in terms of question prediction, I think it's unlikely they give you all 3 of those, okay? Paradoxes, anomalies, inconsistencies, because it's too much ground to cover. They're the 3 words in the rubric, but they would most likely pick one, maybe two of those if they were going to do that. Like human motivations and behaviors. That certainly can come up. That certainly can happen. But paradoxes, anomalies, and inconsistencies, I can't see them doing all 3. It's too much to kind of unpack and relate. They just happen to be together in the rubric. But I would say be prepared for 2 of those. But I would actually tend to think more one of those. I would think they would be linked to like human motivations and behavior. So how does the text represent the paradoxes of human motivations and behavior? So I think one of those maybe with motivations and behavior, or how can storytelling be used to represent human anomalies and inconsistencies? You could get a pair there, but very unlikely you get 3. And what's up, Rahan? Good to see you. I don't know if I'm going to get to the VCE question here. We'll see how we go. I'm just going to try and get through a couple of others. If I don't, jump on to the next one, and I'll make sure we get to that because I know you've got exams coming up. But if it's a quick question, let me have a look. Back with the VCE question. When you say, let's go to this question from Rahan. Again, I have to force myself, Rahan, painfully to ignore the all caps at the start of each word, the uppercase, formatting them. This will have to be the last time that I look at it, if you can avoid it. There are some students who don't use any capitals, to be fair. So it's they're both probably equally problematic for me, but that's all right. So Section A for Oedipus or any text with two types of audience, do I have to mention them both? Do you mean like the contextual? You're talking about two different contexts, like contemporary society as the people now reading the text, and then the society that existed at the time of the text. Because if you're talking about two different contexts, the context in which the text was produced and the context in which people are interpreting the text, like modern contemporary society, and you probably want to be a little bit more specific about that as well. Like, what do you mean by contemporary society? What are the values of contemporary society? If you're looking at that versus the original audience for which it was intended, then yes, you do need to reference both, but you use it in those two ways. That you can talk about the original context and the intention behind it and the values of Athenian society, if you're doing that. And then you can talk about how that impacts, that inspired the text, but then you can talk about how that continues to affect modern audiences. So it's more kind of like later on, whether it's at the end of the introduction or end of the body paragraph, depending on what your question is, that you would then come to like how that's continuing to affect contemporary audiences and why, right? But you always start with the influence of the original Athenian society and the values there that are relevant in inspiring the meaning. And then you can talk about how that can then flow through to contemporary society and create new interpretations, right, based on our context. So you definitely do, but hopefully I'm understanding your question correctly. You address them in that way, and they're separate, right? One is the influence and one affects how we continue to look at the text. Yeah, I would mainly stick to using quotes from the prescribed text, in an efficient way. So don't have super long quotes. In terms of using academic articles or like critics, Module B Advanced is the only place, and English Extension is the only place where you might consider doing that. But I really wouldn't recommend doing it a lot. If you were going to do it for Module B Advanced, you might do it a couple of times, once per paragraph. That's it. Don't do it in your introduction. And you would have a very small quote, and you would talk about how your point of view is backed up, or you're challenging what a critic has said, and then you can have a very short quote that's very specific, based on what you're talking about. But you need to be careful with it because your argument is meant to come from you. It's your personal interpretation. It's your personal reading. English Extension, a little bit different, but if it was Advanced Mod B, I would only use those a couple of times throughout my whole essay, no more than like once per paragraph. And I would make sure that I'm wording it in a way where it's still me making the argument, and then I'm acknowledging how someone else supports that view, and they call that idea a specific thing, they've coined a phrase or something. It's a very subtle reference that just acknowledges you've done some research, but you don't have to do it. You do not have to do it. So focus more on your argument, drawing from all of the sources that you happen to have looked at. Maybe you're just looking at JeddAI and it's got all the different extracts from the sources there, but you don't have to mention them. And if you do, you do it sparingly. Thanks, Boz. Great to see you. And thank you for sending through that That reel, I'm sure I'll enjoy looking at that after this. So let's see what else we've got here. Rahan, hopefully soon we can get some of those videos on here. There still is there still are the Section C content on JeddAI, which you've probably seen, but and there's some video breakdowns on there, I believe. But yeah, we should put more on the channel here for sure. The goat of goats. Looking at this one. If the HSC ranked people across multiple years to see who the absolute goat of each subject is, yeah, we could. I mean, something I've thought about doing. It's tricky to facilitate, but I'm trying to tee it up. Is to do a bit of like what was I calling it? You know, one of those the round tables, a round table where even we have a round table in this room that I'm doing the stream on, and you can kind of get maybe 4 or 5 of like the best past achievers, say in English or another subject, to kind of chat about different approaches, maybe less so about approaches this close to the exam, but like pulling up some questions, getting thoughts on what we do with it, some good ideas coming out of it. So a bit of a roundtable discussion is something I'm trying to tee up before the exams, which would be pretty cool. So you get like maybe 4 or 5 of the best to do it in recent times, and then you can hear it firsthand, right? Let me know if that sounds like it would be useful, because obviously we have access to a lot of the best performers, probably from the last decade. So we can, in terms of people who are still fresh on it and practicing it all the time, there's a solid amount still available to get into a bit of a roundtable format. And just to clarify this one on the to what extent, no, you can 100% agree to a to what extent question. It depends a little bit on what that assertion is, because if you get a statement, sometimes I've seen some statements in the past where it's like it's so obvious to me, at least, because I've studied the text and taught it, where I'm like they're begging people to disagree with part of that. There's some questions like that. So it's always good to ask yourself, if I think about this text, is there an obvious way that I could disagree with this? If there's not, and it's just like, hey, textual conversations force you to ask the question, what's the text really about? You don't need to significantly disagree with that type of question. So you can 100% agree to it and imply it through significantly, largely, or you're effectively saying that's what they do. You could say it's all about doing that. That's fine in some cases. What I was encouraging you to do to just separate yourself, you can still get 100% doing that for a lot of those questions. The exception would be where there's an obvious like exception or caveat to the statement. Like they say, let's think of an example here. Like, T.S. Eliot's poetry is only relevant, was only relevant in his time, or like only relevant for modernism or something, right? And obviously it wants you to say, no, that's not true. It's still relevant today. And now you need to explain why. But you would also want to say, look, it was definitely a product of that time, and here's how it was relevant, but it also continues to affect audiences today, and here's how. So it depends on the nature of the statement. And like, if you see a statement that says always, only, it might be challenging you to think of an exception. So lean into that if you can see it. But if you can't, go with 100% agreement or disagreement, and that's fine as well. That can get you full marks. I'm not saying you won't get full marks, but there are some statements where it's designed to separate students, and some of them will know how to go beyond the statement and say, look, it does do that. I agree with the question, but it also does this. And it's just a little ad that if you can see it, you see it, fantastic. If you don't, you don't. The more you practice it, the more you'll be able to kind of respond to those. But challenge yourself in the lead up to think about how you could disagree with a statement that says to what extent. But you can 100% agree with the vast majority of them for sure. Okay, so don't worry about having to disagree. I'm just encouraging you to consider it, at least when you're practicing, just in case that kind of situation arises, and gives you a good shot to show off if you can. But don't force it if you can't see it. Yeah. How do you come up with a question to write your mod A prepared response to? Can you give an example for the Richards? Look, I like to pick a question that I would want to get, but that's also realistic, like that's possible. Okay. So choose a question that's possible based on the style of past HSE questions, but also that's preferable. Possible and preferable. They're the two criteria for how I come up with a practice question. I want that question, and it's a question that theoretically could come up because it matches the same style and it relates to the module. So can I give you an example for the Richards? I mean, I think just some of the, I'll give you actually a type of question that I like that is very much possible. Let me just share this. Okay, so module A question. You know, it's not just for Richards, this one. I'm choosing like a more generic one. And you can apply it to Richards or you can apply it to another text. How has your study of looking for Richard, let's say the later text, let me give you the words here, both preserved and transformed, how has your, understanding of, or how has yeah, and you can apply this to anything, right? Like, how has your study of looking for Richard both preserved and transformed the meaning of Richard III? Okay, it's just a nice module question that captures the essence of the module, which is about meaning being transformed, but sometimes also preserved, and you understand things about the context better when you do a comparative study. So that's what I'd be looking at there. All right, I think these earphones are about to drop out. Let's see. I was back to, hey, is Alf still here? Alf, you still here? Still in the house? I'm just thinking of whether I can get onto a couple of sentences from your paragraph if you want some quick feedback. Oh, he's here. All right. He or she, I don't know, but let's get on to it. So I'm going to pull it up now. Yeah, it was the 1984 one that I managed to find. Okay. All right. Boom. All right. So this is a 1984 piece here. Composers shape text in memorable ways to illuminate the unique experiences of others. All right, I kind of like that because it's got like unique. I like the memorable ways. Composers shape text in memorable ways. See, I like the ways aspect because that relates to form. Like, what way is the text shaped, right? So for me, that screams form. It also speaks to the concepts as well and other things, but the way the text has been put together in a memorable way, I'd interpret it through the lens of form so that I can show off my knowledge, or your knowledge in this case, the alpha knowledge of how the text was put together. So third person limited narration. It's it's part of the dystopian genre. There's satirical elements, there's futuristic elements, right? There's non-linearity to the structure. There's flashbacks, there's anecdotes, there's focalization of Winston's perspective. There's pastiche. There's the whole like metatextual element of Goldstein's manual. There's all of that. There's the appendix at the end that kind of seems to offer this final glimpse of hope, notwithstanding the otherwise futile attempt at rebellion that we see Winston undertake. So show off that knowledge of form through memorable ways. Like, it's a memorable dystopian. There's this memorable satire that occurs in this way, right? So that's memorable. And then how does that illuminate the unique experiences of others, right? Unique experiences. So I'll highlight unique. What's the unique experience? Again, I try not to highlight experiences all the time with these human experiences ones, because then you end up trying to say unique experiences as a whole phrase every time. And that makes it harder to expand. The more words you try and reuse, the more you end up repeating the question. Whereas if you really nail the unique part, you could say it's a unique something. It doesn't always have to be experience, but that clearly is the term that separates it, because experiences is part of the whole module, human experiences. So I was looking for a word that's not that. Okay, so memorable form and unique experiences, right? How can you be unique? That comes from anomaly. So it's a good question. Paragraph 1. So you say, by highlighting how oppressive, let me just go up here. By highlighting how oppressive powers manipulate knowledge and information. So first of all, just remember this doubling up problem a lot of students have. So they say something and something. You say knowledge and information. Knowledge, information. Are they really that different? You're diluting the impact of what you're saying. So we try and get rid of that doubling up, and we just focus on one thing. Otherwise, you're convincing yourself that you're saying more than you actually are. Okay, that's why most students do it subconsciously. Feels like you're adding more, but you're actually making it less. So be clear in which thing you mean. And if you feel like you're now not saying that much, when we delete off that bit, maybe you need to add a little bit more specificity to what you have. So manipulate knowledge. What type of knowledge? By highlighting how oppressive powers manipulate what type of knowledge, we'll see, Orwell makes his ideas memorable. Now, see, you say ideas, almost like you've just dropped the word themes. You haven't said what the theme that's memorable is. Orwell makes his ideas memorable. What ideas? How are they memorable? Well, you say by highlighting how oppressive powers manipulate it, right? So this is where I would have taken more of that form approach with the memorable aspect. So let's see here. And this might be like the main thing that I show you here, right? So how is this whole oppressive thing being made more memorable, right? I would say through. And by the way, it's composers shape text in memorable ways to illuminate the idea that there's something unique, the unique experience. I can't see you talk about anything unique, a unique experience here, okay? It's actually in 1984 a case of Big Brother not wanting any unique experiences. It's the deprivation of unique experiences. So there's a creative take on it that might be more relevant, right? So let's give you a phrase here. So by leveraging the dystopian mode of storytelling, right? By leveraging the dystopian mode of storytelling. Now, I haven't said the way of storytelling because it just sounds off, but I'm going to say memorable for sure. This is the form bit though, right? This is what you didn't have. You didn't have any of this form, the dystopian mode. By leveraging the dystopian mode of storytelling, Orwell, right, illuminates the deprivation of unique, right? Of unique. Now I could say unique experiences. Orwell illuminates the deprivation of unique, I'm thinking like expressions of unique experiences of agency. So we'll say of uniquely, because you can actually do something with the unique as long as you use a derivative of the word. Always be flexible with the word. So I'm glad I'm kind of like struggling through this one with you, because it's showing you the different ways that I would be thinking about using the key term of the question, right? So Orwell illuminates the deprivation of uniquely individual experiences. I added in the individual. It didn't have that because the idea is 1980, Big Brother wants everyone to be the same. So there are no unique experiences. That's the take for this particular point about oppression, right? Orwell illuminates the deprivation of uniquely individual experiences, right? Now, when do you get the deprivation, right? It's at the hands of a memorable, though this is an undesirable totalitarian figure, right? A totalitarian government, a memorable, though, let's see, I'll put something in there, totalitarian leader or government, which is Big Brother. But again, we don't need to mention characters in the topic sentence. That's why I'm not saying Big Brother, but I'm saying what Big Brother is. I'm extrapolating to get that conceptual beyond text focus. So everything relates to a character. I'm thinking about Big Brother when I say totalitarian government, but I'm not going to say Big Brother yet. We would bring that in the evidence. So the more you can extrapolate to give the concept, typically the more sophisticated that is, as long as it's not too generic. Now, what have we got for this? So my brain is starting to fail me because it's getting late and it's been a long day. I was here early. So Orwell illuminates the deprivation of uniquely individual experiences at the hands of a memorable, though, again, we said like undesirable, though deeply undesirable, though, you actually had it, though oppressive. What am I doing? You literally had the word there. By leveraging the dystopian mode of storytelling, Orwell illuminates the deprivation of uniquely individual experiences at the hands of a memorable, though oppressive, totalitarian government. Big Brother certainly is memorable, but he's oppressive. So I do this little tweak there. All right, so there's an example of some of the little things I do to get some flair in the topic sentence, okay? So we say memorable, but we qualify that. Memorable in a bad way, okay? Is what we're going for there. So it's a memorable totalitarian government. We're explaining what the memorable thing is, and we've also said that the form was really important. By doing that, we're able to understand this memorable oppression. Okay, so that's key. Alf, does that help with the topic sentence? I've got to jump off because I'm got to be out of here by 10, so that gives me like 3 minutes. Let me know, guys, if that helped in terms of thinking about your topic sentences and the question. I'm just going to show that. Have a look at how we've connected that to the question. Perfect. We'll do some more later. Glad we got to it. Guys, remember, JeddAI.com if you need help with your analysis, if you need to improve your essays quickly before your exams, or you just need help with anything else. Otherwise, reach out by email, hello@JeddAI.com. Any requests, questions. People were asking about jobs earlier. You want to be in the mix for that, send something through. But we'll have more on that later. Of course, reach out anytime throughout the exams and after. And yeah, I'm going to leave it at that because I got to bounce, guys. But jump on. I'll try and jump on later this week. If not, Tuesday next week for sure. I'm going to do, guys. I'm going to do a giant stream before the exams. Okay, that weekend before. What date is that? Is that going to be like the 12th, 11th? Be one of those days, right? I think it'll be the 11th. But yeah, if I'm getting that timing right, the weekend or one of those days, a few days out from your exams, I'm going to jump on, do a monster stream I might get the round table going there. I'm going to get state rankers to join on the stream. We're just going to talk through different situations. I'm going to get a lot of people joining. So expect to see that soon, but I'll touch base with all of you before then and see you next week. But good luck. You all, for those who are doing the HSC who are here, or even VCE, it's time to turn it on now. Like you got to just empty the tank over the next 2 to 4 weeks. But right now, you've got to go full steam ahead. There's no more days to waste, especially with English. You've got to move towards that familiarization, memorization phase. Worst case scenario planning, short answer practice. Make sure everything's timed and cut down. Be ruthless with the cut downs, okay? But this is it. Leave everything out there. Then when you finish your exams, you'll feel great about yourself, which is the best feeling, right? Yes, I actually took myself to another level there. I applied myself like never before. I literally was just single focused. And yeah, hey, one final practical tip. I was talking to someone before about it. Don't try and study for every subject every day. Just choose 2 to 3 and go for more depth so you really get in the zone and start to feel like you're grappling properly with the subject, not just starting to get into it and then you're like, oh, time's up, I've done 50 minutes, I'm going to move to the next one. Try and spend more time, even if you have little breaks during, more time on less subjects per day and make a study plan. Work backwards from the date of your exams so you know exactly where you need to be and what you need to be doing to get to your goal by the date of the exam. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you. Good luck. We'll see you soon.